Hi, this is Bob Larkin. You're listening to Back to the Bins.
Back to the bin.
Everybody ready? You guys ready to go?
Yeah, I think so. So might as well bring this in and start rolling. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Back to the Bins. I'm Paul Spataro, and as usual, I'm joined by Dr. Bill Robinson. Say hello, Doc.
Hello, Doc.
And we are once again joined. It's a much delayed, much effort put into trying to find a time when our schedules match, but we're once again joined by Adam Murd and Chris Eberly from Comic Geek Speak. Welcome aboard, guys.
Gentlemen, thanks for having us on. I look forward to this every year.
Every year?
I look forward to it every year, too, but it seems like we only get to do it every other year.
Biennium, yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, we tried it. I think we've been trying to come up with a mutual date where everybody was available for about a year now.
Yes.
So, unfortunately, life gets in the way for a lot of us. Some of us get very busy around Christmas time. Some of us get very busy around school time. And some of us are just busy all year round. So, what can you do? But I'm really happy to have you guys back again. It's a weird thing when you're a listener, though. You never feel like you're that far away, because I get to hear you guys about once a week anyway. So it's almost like you come to visit every now and again.
Thank you for listening. I really appreciate that.
Well, it's
Now
definitely
we can interact
pleasure.
directly instead of just talking to ourselves.
Instead of me just yelling at my iPod as you're talking. No, I don't think there's anybody who listens to this show who is unfamiliar with Comic Geek Speak. I think that's just a given that they know where you guys come from and everything. So I don't even think I have to worry about giving you a plug. If anything, when you simultaneously air this on your network, that's when we get the plug. So, and I thank you guys for doing that for us each time.
Be sure to mention this in our next episode as well.
You bet.
So, anything just to go into the plug area a little bit, is there anything that you guys have coming up? Any new focus episodes or anything?
Well, I'm always working on new Spotlight episodes. It's been, because of things going on in my life, it's been difficult to focus on them the past several months. But I have one I'm about 2/3 done with, and then I have a couple more I'm planning for the summer. So hopefully I can get back on track with that.
The last one, unless I'm mistaken, I guess the last one was Jack Kirby.
Yeah, we did the 2-part Kirby in this past summer.
That was awesome. That was a great listen.
I appreciate that. And Murd was a vital co-pilot on that one, as always. So.
And then we always get the time bubble, too, so.
Oh, from time to time, yes. Let's not forget your latest brainchild, Chris. CGS Goes to War.
Oh,
yes.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, that was well, we did that a couple episodes back where Murd and I talked about 2 war comics. And it's something we want to return to now and then. And some listeners in the forum made a good point of we could also do that like CGS horror or CGS westerns. So we may try a couple different formats because we certainly love talking about back issues.
Yeah, I don't think I saw the war issue yet or listened to war episode. I don't think I've listened to the war episode yet. Some things get lost in the iPod that they just fall lower on the list and I don't find them. But I'm going to have to listen to that. I am not an avid war comic reader, but I did always enjoy them in the day, so I'm sure I'll enjoy listening to the episode.
We know Dave Pasquarello will listen because we know he collects the war comics.
Oh yeah, and then we just recently we did an episode where we actually had 2 war issues. One of them was the final issue of Combat Kelly.
Yeah, we kind of ripped that up.
Which was amusing in how bad it was. But we also did a series. I wonder if you guys are familiar with it at all. It's called Dreamer. It's an online series.
No, I've never read that.
And we did one issue of it, and it's about a current day girl, who I guess when she goes to sleep, she starts to relive the Revolutionary War with the people there.
Oh, wow.
And it's got the two stories going on simultaneously. And it was the artwork
with Alan
was
Hale. Was it Alan Hale? No, wait.
No,
am I getting
it's
that wrong?
no, it's not. Alan Hale was
Hale
Alan Hale
skipper,
Jr.
sorry.
was the skipper, and Alan Hale Sr. was Little John in Robin Hood.
It was something Hale. I can't
Nathan
remember.
Hale.
Nathan Hale. See, there was the right amount of letters. Okay, maybe not. But maybe
There's the right amount of
change a
letters.
couple out.
Alan and Nathan.
There's an A and an N in there, and there's two N's.
In common, yeah.
Oh my God.
Whatever. Don't make fun of me in front of guests. Why do you do this to me? You know, it's like we're a married couple. I asked you not to do this before the show. I can't believe this.
I do feel like I'm married again. All right. Anyway, so we have 3 books between us. So Chris brought a book. Adam brought a book. I have a book. Bill?
No, I don't have a book. I'm bookless Bill again.
And as a general rule, when we have guests on, I let the guests decide what order you want to go in on the books. If you want, you know, whatever you guys would whatever order you prefer is fine with me.
Well, what I was just talking to Murd before we got him on the air, that I love how we each did a Marvel book from a different era. So Paul, yours from the 1970s, mine is the 80s, and Murd is the 90s. So Paul, I think you should go first.
All right, that works for me. I chose Marvel Spotlight number 12, which I've had in my collection. I guess it probably came out shortly before I started collecting, but I had gotten it not too long afterwards. So I've had it in my collection for 40 some odd years, and I probably haven't read it since it was new to my collection. And reading it again last night, it was kind of interesting. It's Marvel Spotlight number 12, which has a cover date of October 1973. I guess that means it probably came out around July of 73. The cover is by Herb Trimpe, and it shows the Son of Satan. And if anybody's not familiar with the character of the Son of Satan, he's shirtless with a red cape. He's got reddish blonde hair with the front of it in 2 horns. He's got a birthmark that looks like a tattoo of a pentagram on his chest. He wears red tights, yellow boots, and a yellow belt. And he's riding a flaming chariot drawn by flaming horses away from the reader. He's holding a woman around the waist as he calls out, "You rose against me, all of you, now you'll pay." There's a panicking man to the side who says, "Stop him, he ain't human." And it says, "From hell he came." This, just to comment on this before I even get into the book, is I think this is about as good as we get with Herb Trimpe. I've always had a fondness for his artwork. Sometimes it's better than others, but I think this is as dynamic and high quality as I'm going to find from him. The story is titled, of all things, The Son of Satan. It's written by Gary Friedrich, penciled by Herb Trimpe, inked by Frank Chiramonti, lettered by John Costanza. Colored by, it just says colored by Severin. I'm assuming that's Marie and not John, but I don't know for sure.
It's almost definitely Marie, because one of her many bullpen duties was to act as a colorist.
So, there we go. And it is edited by Roy Thomas. The story opens with a man pounding on a door with his wrists locked together with a chain of ankhs. He promises to save his captor's daughter, which is enough to get the captor to release him, and upon release he transforms into his Son of Satan persona. He states that by day he is puny religious weakling Damien Hellstrom, enemy of his father, but by night his true heritage takes control and he becomes his father's son, which is kind of inconsistent throughout the story, because sometimes he seems to be his father's son and more often he seems to be his father's enemy. The 2 men who released him quickly have second thoughts, but they're subdued by him. Despite that, they're not willing, or they are willing, to allow him to kill them rather than tell them where the girl he promised to save is. He promises that he won't harm her, but seeks Satan, who is possessing her at this time. They're convinced rather easily, and one of the men tells him that the girl, her name is Linda, seemed to be possessed and vanished as he was seeking help for her. Hellstrom waves his trident, causing a storm from which his demon-drawn chariot appears. He takes his leave on the chariot as the men exposit on the fear of having unleashed something terrible on the world. Several miles away, Roxanne Simpson, the main squeeze of Johnny Blaze the Ghost Rider, is being terrorized by some cyclists until they're confronted by Hellstrom. He makes quick work of the gang and even uses his Hellfire to melt a gun. Hellstrom talks in a real creepy way, kind of looks like he's going to rape her as he's addressing her, but then gets a bit rough and he questions her. Once she gives him some information, he lowers her into the desert and makes his way to a plateau where he makes his way to the gateway to hell. He reaches a throne room where he confronts his father, who has the girl, Linda, and Johnny Blaze as his captives. Hellstrom openly mocks his father, saying that he's getting old and pointing out that his trident is made of netheranium, the one substance that can sap his power. In response, the devil sets a slew of demon minions on Hellstrom. Hellstrom fights them off and decides to destroy a bridge that would cause hell to fall. He makes his way to the bridge and has demons coming towards him on either side. He holds his trident high, but agrees to not destroy the bridge if the two hostages are released. As they leave, he tells Johnny that he only did what he did to spite his father, and as they leave, Satan causes a nearby volcano to erupt, but Damien calls his chariot to them. He takes them to the desert and leaves them, and thinks to himself that he will return in his human form to them. Now, I thought this was kind of cool in a lot of ways. One of the things is, just considering at the time this came out, what hold the Comics Code Authority had, what they were allowing, because I know, at this point they were allowing things that they hadn't done in the past, and that's when Marvel could do all these monster books. But this still seems to be a pretty bold step for them to actually have the son of Satan. And initially, unless I'm mistaken, and Chris, you're the historian, so you may know better than me. Initially, his father is Satan, and then later on, that's kind of retconned to have him be one of the demons. Yep. Mm-hmm. But at this point, he's literally the son of Satan. So I think that's a pretty bold move. Although he says he just did what he did to spite his father, and yet wouldn't destroying that bridge and causing hell to fall actually be a more, a bigger blow to his father than just releasing his two prisoners. So I don't know about that as far as logic goes. But I am very curious as to what each of you guys thought of this book.
Murd, mind if I go first?
Absolutely, because I haven't read this book.
All right. Paul, I love that you chose this because this period of Marvel I so groove on because in so many ways it's so ridiculous and over the top. As you said, so this is the early 70s. So this is what, and when you read about Marvel history, this is what they call Phase 2. And this is when Roy Thomas becomes the editor-in-chief. And as you mentioned, they had liberalized the code after the legendary Spider-Man drug issues, issues 96 through 98. And now they could use supernatural characters, horror characters. Hence, you have the deluge of Marvel monster characters. Some are eminent characters who have no copyright protection, like Dracula. They can use Monster Frankenstein, Werewolf, etc. And we actually did a spotlight episode of the Marvel Monsters back in 2013. And as part of that research, Murd and I, dug into the Son of Satan. And what's really interesting, and you touched upon this as well, is that when Stan Lee was just a font of ideas, like he'd tell Roy Thomas, do this, do that. And one of them was, let's do a book about the devil. And Roy Thomas, because I read an interview with him, he said, well, Stan, we might get, friction on that from, religious groups, etc. He said, why don't we do a book about the son of the devil? And Stan's like, great! So, they did the Son of Satan, and as you mentioned, originally this was supposed to be the actual Satan. And then as the years passed, Marvel must have realized, well, maybe we don't want to be pigeonholed by saying like this is actually the devil, this guy with like a flaming body and like his bones, his skull scepter. So they said that it was a lesser demon masquerading as Satan. And this book for me is such the essence of early Bronze Age comics. You got the motorcycle gang, with wearing the Wehrmacht helmets, and the gang leader's named Big Daddy. You got
And,
the crossover.
and as all gang leaders were in comics of that era, he had to be wearing a vest with nothing under it.
Exactly.
No shirt, just a vest.
Excellent point. We've got, the crossover with Johnny Blaze, Ghost Rider. It's Gary Friedrich's writing this, so it's very much in that Bronze Age style. And I'm interested to know what you think, Paul, having revisited this after so many years, how differently comics were written back then.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of the old style where they're describing a lot of the action to you in captions. You get thought balloons. But, compared to comics today, for some people might find this very wordy. What was your reaction to that, reading it again after all these years?
Oh, you know what? The Bronze Age is my sweet spot. And, they always say that when you're, somewhere between like 10 and 15, that's when you develop, what you're exposed to then is the tastes that you're going to carry with you the rest of your life. So the Bronze Age is totally my sweet spot, and those are the comics that I still prefer. I bemoan the loss of thought bubbles.
Oh, me too.
I think that they were a terrific tool to give you exposition without having to have people sound stupid as they were saying things, because they could just think stupid things instead of saying them. So I think that doing away with them was a mistake. And the only time I've seen anybody try and bring them back in the last, 15 years or so, was when Brian Bendis did it. But he did it more for comic effect than for storytelling.
Yeah, and I limit them as well, because when you think about it, I don't think Spider-Man would be the character he is today without all the thought balloons, because all the, his agony, his angst, his humor, so much of that was in those thought balloons, and I agree that that's very much missed. And I concur. I love this style. I mean, some writers I think are more adept at it than others back then, but Herb Trimpe is always one of my favorite artists. I actually had the good fortune to meet him not long before he passed away at a show. And I commissioned a sketch he did of Snake Eyes from G.I. Joe, which I treasure. And what a gentleman!
I can say the same thing. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just what reminiscing about Herb a little bit. Back in the 70s when he was doing the Hulk, I had written not only to him, I had written to several people, but I had written him a letter when I was 12 years old, telling him how much I enjoyed his work and asking him for an autograph. And he sent me a postcard. To Paul, best wishes, Herb Trimpe, with the tiniest of thumbnail sketches of the Hulk on it.
Oh, fantastic.
And then I managed to meet Herb again in I guess it was probably about 2013 at New York Comic Con. And I had the thought beforehand, I actually brought what he sent me with me. So I showed it to him, and he was, you could see, he opened up into a huge grin. He got a big kick out of it. But then I commissioned a head sketch of the Hulk from him at that show, and I agree with you totally. He is an absolute gentleman. We took a picture together holding the sketch that he had done for me, and I talked to him for about 15-20 minutes, and he was just absolutely a pleasure.
I had the same experience. But I've always loved his artwork. And I agree. I mean, I think some of his most dynamic artwork is actually some of the Ant-Man stories he did in Marvel Feature in the 1970s. I'm sorry, Murd, were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, very well. But I've always loved his work on the Hulk, G.I. Joe, everything he did. And such dynamic scenes in this book. The half splash page where they show Damien Hellstrom fighting off all the horde of satanic minions. In the underworld, beautiful artwork by Trimpe. What I found most interesting, though, in this issue, the page you referenced where I'll read it here. He says, "Now at last we can talk, my dear. You are very beautiful, and I pity the fact that I haven't time to linger with you and perhaps whisper words of love into your ear. Your golden hair is most intriguing, so soft, so shimmering in the pale moonlight. Only rarely have I beheld its loveliness, but for now, a mere touch is all time allows me." Then he pulls her hair back. Then to business.
But that shot where he's pulling the hair back, that looks very much like when you see a scene like that in a movie. I think he really did capture the essence of that violence in that shot.
But this page just reminds me of, it's the 70s. It's the early 70s. You would never see this in a comic today, probably, in this kind of context.
It's full of machismo.
Yes, and again, it also reminds us, and I want to get Murd's thoughts on this, Murd, isn't Damien Hellstrom always been portrayed as a very ambiguous character, not really necessarily always a heroic character?
Yes, and that needle of ambiguity swung much more towards the villainous or diabolical in the 90s.
Back when they did Hellstorm, that series?
Prince of Lies, yes. Part of it written by Warren Ellis.
Yeah, I've never sat down and read that one, but I know of it. I pretty much stopped following his character after he was done in the Defenders.
Because that was when he was more a little bit on the heroic side when he was in the Defenders, wasn't he?
Yes.
I remember correctly.
Well, at that point whatever his story arc was within the Defenders, if I'm remembering it correctly, he was trying to free himself of the curse of his heritage. And I seem to remember towards the end he was able to do so, and that's when he married Patsy Walker. And, at least, as is always the case, it never really ends that way because they always come back and they have to create something new. But at that time it was, and they lived happily ever after.
But, of course, they didn't, because I think she took her life at some point after that.
I think she took her life, and then he had to go down to hell to rescue her soul. And I think she was brought back to life, but they were divorced.
Yeah.
They always have to bring them back and eliminate and they lived happily ever after.
I'm sorry, Murd. What did you just say?
I was saying that Hellstrom had to trick the Thunderbolts into going down and rescuing her. They thought they were bringing Hawkeye's wife Mockingbird back from the dead, but it was Patsy Walker instead.
That's what it was. Okay, yeah. Thanks, Murd.
Murd, that's why you are clutch, brother. Outstanding.
Yeah, we're not planning on having a muddle the Murd here today, but you've already acquitted yourself fine.
We could have a befuddle the Bill, but that happens every show.
But this is a great selection, Paul. It's such a wonderful time capsule of a certain. Like, I love early 70s Marvel, the monster books. I eat that stuff up. To me, Tomb of Dracula is at the apex when it comes to the creativity of that period for Marvel. And this is a bizarre character in many ways. It's the look of it, everything. It's so funky in a way and absurd, but it works. And also just him in conflict about, he kind of leaves Johnny Blaze in the desert at the end, abandons him, and
what a douche.
Yeah, he's not. It's not like, and he's struggling with himself because he sees his human alter ego as like a weakling, and it's interesting how this character has sort of evolved and changed over the years. So great.
Yeah, I found it amusing that he's almost, there's almost a Bruce Banner Hulk thing. During the day I'm puny Damien Hellstrom. Now, what I saw on it was the character as suggested by Stan Lee. The title of the series was going to be The Mark of Satan.
That's correct.
And that they changed it to the Son of Satan. But one of the things I read that I thought was interesting, and I think it does go to what a gentleman Herb Trimpe was, is that he and Gary Friedrich are credited with creating the character. And when they interviewed Herb about it, he said, no, Gary had planned everything out and had it all done. All I did was draw, what he told me. So he didn't take any credit for it, even though they were handing it to him on a silver platter.
Well, that speaks volumes about him. I mean, Gary Friedrich's one of the sort of the sadder creator stories in the American history of the American comic book. He did a tremendous interview in the original volume of the Great Tomorrow's publication, Comic Book Artist. I forgot the issue number, but he talks very candidly about his entire life, his alcoholism, his personal struggles, but also working in the Marvel bullpen in the late 60s and early 70s and what that was like. And it's a fascinating interview.
Tomorrow's is just a treasure trove of good reading. I just wish there were enough hours in the day for me to read it all.
Amen to that.
And I did get the Herb Trimpe book from them.
I have it too. I have it right on my shelf here. In fact, I'm using it right now as research for a forthcoming spotlight. That's all I'll say on that.
Something to look forward to there. Bill, did you get a chance to read this?
Yeah, and also I noticed while we've been talking, I've been looking at some images of Hellstrom because I picked up in this book that the pentagram on his chest is, it's usually certain iconography. It would be the star would be upside down, but in this comic it's right side up. And I'm looking at, it seems like even with his first solo series, it switched to being upside down. I wondered if there was a code thing. They were afraid to show it in the the star pointing down instead of the way it is here. Did you guys catch that by chance?
Oh, that's a great catch on your part, Bill.
Yeah, I had not seen that, but that is a good catch.
Yeah, because it's right side up, which normally all the icons it would be the other way, but here and what was it like his first solo series, it was flipped.
Do you know in devil worship lore, because we're all very well versed in that, but do you know what the significance of it being upside down would be?
I believe the right side up is, I sound like such a loser, but let me go on. So upside down, supposedly that's, evil. Right side up is good witches. Now I'm getting this based from TV and books and other things, so I'm not that heavily into witchcraft to know. I mean, that's just the way I've always interpreted it, is that the way it is on his chest there would be, he'd be a good witch. I'm a good witch. Or a good devil, perhaps. And then the other way, upside down, with the upside down star, then it would be evil. But maybe they couldn't do it because of the code. They were afraid, perhaps.
I reading through it, I was a little confused by what message they were trying to give you as to the nature of his personality. And I think it could well have been intentional, because they talk about him at night turning into being like his father, but then throughout it he's
hating his father.
Yeah, but throughout it he's fighting against his father. So I'm not really sure where they were going with that.
They're just trying to skirt that edge.
I wanted to point out, by the way, that because I've got it from my library, that Comic Book Artist, issue 13, cover date May 2001. Not only is there a tremendous interview with Gary Friedrich, but the whole magazine is dedicated to Marvel monsters of the 1970s. The whole magazine, it's phenomenal.
Now, I wanted to touch a little bit on the monsters because you mentioned them, and I just, over the course of this show, we've done a fair number of monster books, and I'm certainly enjoying those to the point where I very rarely pick up any more books in my collection. In fact, I'm trying to get rid of some to make space. But my Bronze Age stuff is kind of, that's set in stone. I'm not getting rid of any of that. I think one of the most underrated series, and it was very short-lived, but I think the Living Mummy was one of the most underrated series that they did.
Murd can speak to that. Huh. I can't. Oh, you love the Living Mummy.
I do. Well, I love the idea of him. I haven't read any of his appearances. I own his first appearance from Marvel Chillers, but it's somewhere in the pile, and I haven't read it.
Yeah, we did our monster spotlight. Murd and I did a little portion that was dedicated to the Living Mummy. Fascinating character. The whole history behind him, and one of the first. Or an early African American character, actually, in comics, essentially.
Yeah. Just plain old African.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Well, but you know what? The Mummy character eventually made its way to America, so I guess that would make him African American at that point.
Yeah,
it's stretching the definition a little, I know.
Indeed, but no, Paul, that whole era of Marvel I just eat it up. Man Thing by Gerber and Mike Plug is amazing. Mm-hmm. Werewolf by Night, Doug Monk, it's fantastic stuff. Mike Plug is all over this period. Yes. Monster Frankenstein, he did with Gary Friedrich. I mean, to me again, the sort of the Mac Daddy of all that is Tomb of Dracula by Wolfman, Colin, and Tom Palmer, which is just visually, some of the greatest work I think of Gene Colan's career, and the stories are just a cut above.
Were there any issues of that series that were not drawn by Colan?
He drew every issue, all 7.
Phenomenal.
I mean, there were a couple different writers in the first few issues and a couple different inkers, but once it was the Colin Palmer team settled in, that's what you got for the rest of the decade.
That was great stuff. And this, I think we're in agreement that it's just, it's just fun to read these Bronze Age monster books. And there was a certain, for lack of a better word, innocence about them, that they were presented in a very straightforward manner for the most part. I don't know if I'm articulating it well enough, but they were very accessible, even if you're not a horror fan, is what I'm more or less thinking.
Well, because I couldn't agree more, because it's the Marvel approach. So it's driven by characters. So they still had the supporting cast. They even had some soap operatic elements. I mean, all the things that made Marvel so captivating to people in the Silver and Bronze Age. And they brought that to the monster characters too, and that's why I think those books are so accessible. I couldn't agree more.
And just the last thought on the monsters in general is, back in the 70s when I was reading this, I had no idea that Jack Russell was actually the name the name of a canine.
Yes.
It's, now that I know that, I have a tough time reading
I didn't know that
without
then
smiling.
either. Yeah.
But when I read them, it was just that's a name. That's all. I had no clue. So I guess we should probably rate this one, and usually we let the person who synopsizes it go first. So I will. I think that this is, as like I said, pretty much as good of a Herb Trimpe cover as you're going to find. I think the choice of the angle that they show him moving at is slightly different than what would be conventional. I think conventional would be to have him heading straight towards the reader, and then I guess you'd have the horses kind of lower and him higher so that you could get him right in the center of the page, almost make it a poster image. So this is a little different because he's off to the side. He's heading away from the reader. He looks threatening. The cover looks dynamic. I can't imagine seeing this as a kid and not wanting to pick it up. And so in my opinion, this is absolutely an A cover. The interior art is really, really solid. In my opinion, there's a couple of the facial renderings that I don't think quite are up to snuff. But other than that, I think it's good storytelling. I think it's good pacing. I think, again, this is, top-notch Herb Trimpe. So I'm going to say a B+ on the interior art. And the story itself, I think the ambiguity that I'm seeing is intentional, so I can't really criticize it for that at all. I think it's edgy, and it creates the desire to come back and visit this character again to find out what he really is all about. So I'm going to say a B+ on the story as well, and I'm going to give the book overall an A-.
You want me to go?
Sure.
Yeah. I in general agree with your grading. I would give the book an A- more for the artwork, which I think is gorgeous. Gary Friedrich was a fine scribe. The pacing, the plot is very strong. I think the dialogue doesn't hold up well. Reading it now in 2018, I find it a little stilted and hyperbolic in ways that I don't think translate well. It didn't detract overall from my enjoyment of the story, but that I would give it an A- grade overall as well.
Bill?
Yeah, there's a couple spots in the art that it looks a little like the one where he's talking to Satan. Oh, where is that? That's down here. Where he looks kind of like indifferent, like almost like a cartoon character-ish, where they're standing face to face, kind of.
You're talking on page 21?
Yes.
Top photo?
Yeah, that top one. I'm not really fond of that one. But overall, I would give the art probably like a B+, and the story, yeah, it's a little wordy, but sometimes we kind of let that go. We try not to, I try not to rate it on what I would think today too much. If I was reading it off the stands, I try to think about back when it was originally released. The cover, yeah, that is a different shot. The way the horses are going away. Yeah, that isn't something we normally see. Yeah, because usually you'd have it coming at you. So the cover, I think overall I'm going to give the whole book a B+.
Okay, I think if you look to the cover of issue 13, that's a far more traditional view, and that's kind of what I would have expected for this. But I'm happy with what we got. We might as well move on to the second book then. That would be you, Chris.
All right, Power Man and Iron Fist, issue 75. All right, the cover date is November of 1981, so that means it came out probably the late summer of 1981. You've got the writer is the wonderful Mary Jo Duffy, one of the most underrated writers from this time period. The great Carrie Gamble is penciling, Ricardo Villamonte inker, Jim Novak letterer, C. Shield, that might be Kristen, I'm not sure, colorist, Denny O'Neill's editing, and Jim Shooter's editor-in-chief.
Chris, real quick,
yes.
sorry to interrupt. Carrie Gamble, what's his relationship, or am I thinking of the wrong person to John Byrne?
You're thinking of John Byrne's stepson. I don't think that's Carrie Gamble. I think that's
Kieran Dwyer.
That's it.
Okay, because this artwork looks to me through here was very reminiscent of Byrne for me. But
there are a lot of shots that I see that in. I agree with you on that.
Okay, all right, sorry.
Please, that's great. We also remember that Byrne did a great one with Chris Claremont on Iron Fist in the Bronze Age, so that may be
right. That's why it was so confusing. I'm like, a lot of this in certain shots looks so much like it was done by John Byrne.
Yep. No, I understand that. So the cover, the most requested story of all, Return to Kunlun. And I remember when I was a kid, I mispronounced it Kunlun. But the actual title of the story is This Insubstantial Pageant Faded. All right, so a little bit of background. So, because this is the original copy I got when I was a kid in 1981, and as I'm sure we can all relate to, in 1981, I hadn't discovered comic shops yet. There weren't that many around yet. So comic books for me were wherever you could find them, often at a convenience store, spinner rack, or a flea market. And you couldn't consistently get usually issue after issue each month. It was ever happened to be on the rack when you walked in. And when my parents would always grab me books whenever we went to go out. I think we got this one at the now lost Hubbard Cupboard convenience store, which is in central New Jersey. And I knew nothing about Power Man and Iron Fist. Nothing. I knew about Power Man because I had a book of his from the earlier Bronze Age that I had got from my cousins. Iron Fist I'd never seen before, but the cover, this stunning painted cover, unfortunately they had the Columbia 10-speed racer thing at the top, which kind of detracts from it a little bit, but the cover really struck me. So
is that Bob Larkin?
I think you're right about that, Paul. I was wondering who painted this, but I think you're right about that.
Well, you keep talking. I'll look it up.
Great. So the cover grabbed me, let's see, in 1981 I was 8 years old, so really struck me. And plus it's a thicker comic. It was 75 cents, and this was a double-sized issue, which was always a kid. What a thrill when you got, sort of more bang for your buck. And I took it home, and I devoured this book repeatedly for the years to come. I still read this story at least once a year. To me, this is a perfect example of knowing nothing about these characters, and you can pick up this book and you learn all the essentials. And that shows what a great writer Mary Jo Duffy was. And as I got older and I started to really explore these characters in the history, I realized how much she put into this story to sort of catch people up on the sort of the dynamic of Power Man and Iron Fist, especially the history of Iron Fist himself, with Kunlun and Lee Kung and UT, the august personage, and Jade, and all of that, and the whole Shangri-La feeling of Kunlun. And I'm not going to go through every aspect of the story because I don't want to spoil it too much because I want people to read this, because I think if you've watched the Iron Fist show on Netflix, and that's a whole other discussion, and if you've watched the Luke Cage show on Netflix, I think you would get a lot out of this particular comic because it's about Danny and Luke ending up back in Kunlun. As we all know probably, that Kunlun only appears on Earth from another dimension every, I think it's 10 years?
Yes.
Correctly? So they happen to be at the portal at that time, and they end up back in Kunlun, and Danny hasn't been back since he first left it, but back when he first appeared in, I think it was Marvel Premiere, I want to say.
Yes. You're correct on that as well.
And Mary Jo Duffy did wonderful work on this book. She also did wonderful work on the Star Wars comic in the 1980s. And she's an outstanding writer. I don't think she gets all the credit and attention she deserves. In fact, in the last Power Man Iron Fist book that was done by David Walker and Murd, who was the artist on he's a fan of our show. What's that?
Sanford Green.
Sanford Green, thanks, brother. My apologies, Mr. Green, for brain farting there for a moment. They actually have referenced Mary Jo Duffy in that book just to show they were acknowledging the history. And what's great about this story is they give you the entire history of Kunlun. Basically, they kind of revisit and expand upon Danny's origin, what happened with his parents when they came to Kunlun, how he was trained, the politics of Kunlun, and what the Iron Fist actually means to the city, and how Luke Cage, in some amusing scenes, how he tries to fit into this sort of Shangri-La environment. And then, of course, that they really go into sort of the dark political underbelly of the city and what's going on behind the scenes. I always love stories like that kind of peel back the facade. And we're introduced to the Hill Three. Not introduced, but these are the vegetable-like creatures who are enemies of Kunlun. And they explore what happened to Iron Fist's sister. And also they have Master Khan, who's one of the great sort of nemeses of Power Man and Iron Fist. This book is the art. Cary Gamble, I haven't seen much of his work. This art is gorgeous. There's scenes in the latter part where Iron Fist battles a mystical ninja employed by Master Khan. The combat scenes are tremendous. I mean, just the way he tells the story through the martial arts action shots, beautifully paced. And this guy was a top-notch artist. I think he's still living, actually. But again, this is a great example of sort of, even though it's coming out of the Power Man Iron Fist story issues, like it's not just it's referencing things that have happened before. But it's the kind of book you don't see much today where you can just – I'm an 8-year-old kid. I picked this up off the newsstand, and I was instantly taken in by it. And after this, I wanted to read every Power Man Iron Fist story I could get my hands on. So, the Duffy Gamble team really did their work here quite well. And, Marvel in the 80s was, I think, a very exciting time for the company. They were doing a lot of interesting, innovative things, from graphic novels to the Epic Illustrated line to – continuity still mattered in the 80s. It wasn't that long from the Silver Age, so they still were referencing to those wonderful editorial boxes you really ever see before, events that had happened in the past. And when you read books as a kid, as I was from Marvel in the 80s, I really felt immersed in that world. And I really wanted to learn the history because it was still very accessible, where today it's very difficult, I think, to do that. So this is a treasured book from my childhood. And as I read it now as a middle-aged man, to me, it still holds up as a great example of what the American comic book can achieve. And also, frankly, I'm such a sucker for like that, because Iron Fist came out of like the kung fu craze of the early 70s, and which has some silly stereotypical aspects to it, but that permeates the character too in a way, because that's part of his sort of his foundation. And you find, like, even the title, "This Insubstantial Pageant Faded." I mean, it's such a hokey, like, curio shop type title.
Borderline pretentious.
Yeah,
but almost in a way that makes you smile.
Exactly. That's where the character comes from. So, this is a treasure book. So I look forward to hearing your guys' opinion.
Yeah, I think I'm going to follow your lead and not give too much of the plot away, because I agree. If somebody finds our discussion of it interesting, pick it up and read it. First point is I did look it up. Yes, it is Bob Larkin that did the cover. And we met Bob Larkin at Eternal Con here a couple of years ago, and he's another gentleman. Real nice man.
We inundated him with copies of Dazzler #1. We all had a copy because we were. I don't think we realized he was there.
No,
we were bringing it for John Romita Jr.
Yeah, because he did the interior art in that issue. What happened was when Dazzler #1 came out, whatever year that was, 79, say, somewhere around there, I bought in hook, line, and sinker to this. This is going to be the next big thing. And I think, I don't remember how much it was for a copy, maybe 50 cents. And I brought $5 and I bought 10 copies of it because this is going to be the next big thing, So when we were going to Eternal Con the night before, I had the guys over here for a barbecue, and I was showing them where I keep my books, and somehow that book came up. So I said, well, you know what? John Romita Jr. is going to be there tomorrow. Here, everybody take one copy of it for yourself and get him to sign it. So as it turns out, John Romita Jr. was not there that day, but Bob Larkin was. So he signed everybody's cover, which he had painted, and that is actually another beautiful painted cover.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, and I think I really like this cover as well. I mean, I like the foreboding figure in the background, the plant creatures that are surrounding them. Just the look on Luke's face is just great. And we just finished doing a retrospective on the Celestial Madonna story.
Oh, wow.
And so we're dealing with the Coati, and then we got walking plants here that are that are aggressive. So it's
asparagus men, wherever they are.
It's kind of cool in comparison. I really did I like the fact that they used Luke as our point of view character.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
So they were able to do a lot of the exposition without having to have it seem heavy-handed, because he's totally new to this whole experience. So they have to explain to him what's going on, and it feels natural as they're going through it. So I thought it was very well written, very well laid out. It is a longer story. It's probably the story itself, I guess, is probably about 35 to 40 pages long. So, like you said, double length. And there's a lot of twists and turns, and there is, and I think it was legitimately up until this point that Kunlun was presented as Shangri-La, as you said.
Yeah.
And I think they took the sheen off of Shangri-La in this issue, and I think they did it in a really good way, so that the story closed out, and you feel like the story is over, but there's more story to tell, and that it's going to be you're going to be back there again eventually. So I think they left a lot of room for more stories as well, which is always a nice thing.
What did you think of the power? Like, what did you think of the Power Man Iron Fist dynamic in the story in general?
You know what? I might think that's one of the areas where it actually lagged a little bit. I think at this point, I think they started teaming up in issue 48, if I remember correctly. So they had about 27 issues as partners under their belt. And I think they had already established the relationship pretty clearly over the course of those 27 issues or so. And because of that, they had the freedom now. They had earned the freedom to have Danny go into Kunlun and be, like, this is my old home, and I'm meeting up with the people, and I'm doing my thing, and I'm leaving Luke behind while Luke is investigating and figuring it out himself. Until we got to the final climax of it, I didn't really feel a lot of the dynamic between them. But then at the end, it does when the story all wraps up. I think you do feel it again.
Yeah, I agree with you that using Luke as the POV character here for the audience was an outstanding device for the story, because this is a very alien world to the reader, and Luke is finding out with us what's really going on, but underneath sort of that glittering facade of this Shangri-La type society. And I think Duffy's an outstanding writer of dialogue, and she really captures the different characters' voices. Like Luke, this is my first real experience of how Luke Cage talks, and he's I had such a distinct voice of his in my head ever since. And the contrast with the way Danny expresses himself. Like, there's the great scene where there's one scene where they're talking in a fountain, and Luke's is parched. He takes some water, and Luke says, Danny says, "No, you can't drink from that fountain. It's not the way." And Luke kind of cracks wise, and they always reminded this is a very odd team. They come from such different worlds, yet they form this brotherhood. And when you not to get off too much track, when you watch The Defenders on Netflix, and I've talked on our own show CGS about my feelings on the Iron Fist show, and I'm actually a little more merciful towards a lot of other people. But I think that in The Defenders, when they put the two actors together, I think you start to actually believe. I believe more in that actor playing Iron Fist in the scenes when he was with Luke Cage, because they seemed to have a spark, and that some of that dynamic came out. And I thought the Iron Fist character came to life more in the presence of Luke Cage. Also, I think he was just being forced to act with people who were just far better actors than him. So, but to me, what I loved about this story, and I love about every story I've read of the two characters since, because I've read much of the series over the years, and individually, is just the bond between them and how they're so different, yet they find that brotherhood between them.
I think that Luke's dialogue in this book is better written than most of the people who wrote Luke in this era. I think a lot of the early Luke Cage books kind of jump out at you as, it's a white guy trying to figure out what a black Harlem guy would sound like. And just really doing the stereotypical, I don't know that they were failing miserably at it, but just, really just highlighting the stereotype.
We also have to remember that Luke, I'm sorry, go ahead. I apologize.
Well, just in this, I thought his dialogue sounded much more natural, even though she did manage to stick in a Christmas, not a sweet Christmas, but a Christmas.
You gotta have that.
Yeah, at some point. But it wasn't heavy-handed, and I also liked the way he was written in that because he's a streetwise kind of guy, he's walking around, he's like a little skeptical to begin with, so he kind of sees that underbelly, I think, from the start.
That's a good point.
So I just think he was well written in it. I think the whole story overall was well written, and I think some of the twists and turns in it, some of them you see coming because I think you're supposed to see coming, and some of them I think are well hidden.
I also have to remember that Luke Cage, his foundation is a blaxploitation character. When he first appears in the early 70s, I mean, that's very much the age of Shaft and Foxy Brown and all these films, and Marvel is definitely trying to cash in that, just like they're trying to cash in on the Kung Fu craze with Iron Fist. But I think both characters have since, transcended essentially their origins when it comes to that. Mm-hmm. But I'm hogging. I'm sorry. What do the other guys think?
I would have liked to have seen an Iron Fist with this amount of Kung Fu technique in the actual Iron Fist show. Instead of just a lot of standing and preening and meditating. Maybe
that was one of the criticisms I heard of the show was that for anybody who knows martial arts, and I'm not one of those people, but then anybody who knows martial arts could see that Iron Fist did not look natural doing the moves that he was doing, and that the people he was fighting against actually looked much smoother and more natural, and that it looked like if it was real they would be beating him.
Well, I from what I read, to be fair to the actor, I don't think he was given a lot of time to prepare.
Well, yeah, he was thrown into it pretty quickly. So, I mean, Finn Jones. So, I mean, it's yeah.
I mean, he has the general look of Danny Rand as far as physically, but I'm not sure that he was. I'm not sure that they couldn't have found a better casting choice on that one.
Maybe a stunt double who could knew Kung Fu. Or martial arts. It's amazing what they can do with editing nowadays.
Well, I concur with Bill, though, because when you look at they don't have page numbers, but when he's fighting the ninja in the climactic scene, the action sequences are phenomenal. I mean, what pacing. Holy
we got no scenes anywhere near that in the Iron Fist or really in the Defenders. I mean, that one where he's on his back, well, not even on his back, he's on his hands, kicking straight up in the air into the ninja's face.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I mean, yeah.
It's a very, very well drawn fight sequence, and I think sometimes I tend to gloss over that and not give it the credit that it's due, because I think very often we see fight sequences that don't have the same dynamism of this, and because of that, I'm used to not seeing it. So I kind of, like I said, I gloss over it when we don't have it, and sometimes I flip by it too quickly, and I need to, on a page like this, the one that's kind of the montage page, I need to just stop on that and look at each individual image closely, because it's rendered with care and it deserves the attention.
It's like a ballet.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And we have to remember that, martial arts, depicting martial arts fighting in comics, I mean, we have to give a lot of credit to Frank Miller with Elektra. I go back to Daredevil 181 and the classic fight between her and Bullseye, which is still one of the greatest, sort of displays of violence I've ever seen in a comic. But this is right up there too, and I concur. The montage page, as you mentioned, Paul, you just go from look at how Gamble paces from one move to the next as your eyes follow from the sequence, the flow of the fight, and going down to the bottom where Iron Fist has the sword against his throat. Or the preceding page where you watch the ninja elbow him in the throat, and this is masterful storytelling, and from a visual sense.
And while at the same time as he's doing that, he's got the the hordes of people surrounding Luke, and him just tossing them around like rag dolls, and he manages to stick that in and never make you feel like you're missing the action in the other sequence.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Bill, what was your impression of the story in general?
I had not read this before, and I was a little bit pressed for time, so I had to do one of those skimming along. So
Understood.
I'm going to go back later and try to give it the read that it deserves. I really like the opening page with the giant jade tiger leaping out. And Khan. See, I knew somebody had to do it. I was going to do it earlier, but I didn't want to interrupt your synopsis, so we're going I'll just save it for later. So,
I appreciate that reference, sir.
Yeah, this is there's so much in this book, but it doesn't. I mean, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, this kind of goes, Paul, where we were saying. Because in a recent show we covered 2 brand new books compared to where we usually cover the older books, and we were comparing and contrasting to the stuff we did with the Celestial Madonna, and how we were saying like that was so laden down with exposition and dialogue and just compared to new books, which a lot just fly by. But this is kind of like a happy medium. Because we were saying, I was like, where did they become kind of even between story and art instead of just big splashes with a little bit of dialogue, and you pay your $3.99 for your 17-20 page book and you're done in 5 minutes.
I respectfully disagree with your characterization.
I know you do.
No, I get your point, and I don't disagree with your point, but I think there is a tremendous amount of story in here. I don't think
it doesn't feel like in the Celestial Madonna it almost felt overwhelming to try to even read through some of the stories.
But I think there's just as much story here as there. I just think it's better paced.
Okay, all right.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's not. I don't think it's that they, decrease the story slightly and increase the art. I think they have just as much story in here. The artwork jumps up a level, certainly, compared to what we saw in the Celestial Madonna storyline.
Especially at the end.
But the story, I think there's so much going on in this story that, this is a jam-packed book as far as what's happening. But I just think it's very, very well paced to the point where you don't feel like you're being overwhelmed by it.
I concur wholeheartedly. I mean, I'm looking here at the where they give you the whole basically origin of Iron Fist of Danny Rand, because there's multiple Iron Fists, but of Danny Rand over so many pages. There's no page numbers, but where they tell you everything that happened to him, what happened to his parents, and I agree. It's never a chore to read this. It's so well paced, and Duffy is just a masterful scripter. This rivets me as much now as a 45-year-old man as when I read it as an 8-year-old, and that's saying something. There's plenty of books from when I was a kid that I struggle with today when I return to them, but not this one. And I mentioned to people that and Bill referenced this before. Claremont and Burns did a great run on Iron Fist in the late 70s. That was also continued in Marvel Team Up, a couple key issues, and they referenced that here too because Lee Kung's son Davos, the Steel Serpent Murd?
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm answering when you say Murd. I'm sorry.
That's right, sir. They even refer to that battle that occurred in Marvel Team Up. And Iron Fist wasn't around that long by this point, but he already had a pretty rich history. And I would then recommend to people jump ahead to what I consider the classic Brubaker Fraction Aja Immortal Iron Fist, which I think is one of the best comics of the previous decade. And that also really explores further this history. So it's all connected in by very skilled creative hands.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Is there any, I don't know, maybe one of you might know, these plant creatures, let me see if I could try this, the Hylithri? I don't know how they're pronounced. I assume
You always say Hill 3, don't you, Murd? Hill 3?
I'd always said Heil 3, but Hill 3, now that you mention it, does make a bit more phonetic sense.
Okay. Go ahead,
Now,
Paul. I'm sorry.
Yeah, do either of you know where they go from here, and what kind of history they were given, or
I was just thinking, the thing that most excited me about hearing this review was learning that this was the first appearance of the Hill 3, because I can remember reading sometime in the mid to late 90s, like a 3-issue Iron Fist miniseries, which introduced me to a lot of the secondary characters from the Iron Fist mythos that Chris had been talking about that also appear in Power Man and Iron Fist number 75, like UT, the august personage of Jade, Lei Kung, the Thunderer. We even see a depiction of the dragon Shou Lao, the Undying. The Hill 3 did have a sort of a minor role to play in that miniseries, and I thought, oh, cool, walking topiary people. As you mentioned earlier, Paul and Phil, they're like a bellicose version of the Kotati, well known to students of Avengers lore. So, so now I know where that element of the Iron Fist mythology came from.
Although, Murd, I'm not sure if this is their first appearance. We're trying to confirm that, actually. I may have misspoken there. I'm on the Marvel database.
While you were talking, I opened up their page. It says first appearance, Iron Fist number 2.
Oh, okay.
Oh, all right. So they have even deeper roots than we knew.
And you know what? I can now visualize that cover now that you mentioned it, Paul. So,
you can?
Yeah,
okay, I cannot.
Yeah. No. But, those Bronze Age Iron Fist stories, especially the Claremont... Now, Iron Fist was created by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane. Byrd and Claremont had a nice run with the character, first in Marvel Premiere, and then Iron Fist briefly had his own book in the late Bronze Age. And then, as you mentioned, they brought him into the Power Man book, and then the number just continued with Power Man and Iron Fist. So
now, I'm going to take us on a slight detour and throw out to you just a thought process that we talked about when we did the Celestial Madonna story again. There's a point in there where they talk about the history of the Kotati and how the Kree kind of massacred them, and then they were being grown, for lack of a better word, in like basements to protect them. And I opined that it's possible, knowing that the Marvel staff at that early 70s era was known to be occasionally indulging in things they shouldn't be, that the Kotati might be a substitute for marijuana. And I'm curious as to what the two of you might think of that.
Oh, well, it's widely known, and that several of sort of the Phase 2, the newer creators, I mean, these are all great creators, people like Steve Englehart, Jim Starlin, Tom Sutton, there's so many others. Who did Doctor Strange? Tremendous artist.
Golden?
Oh, Frank Brunner,
yep. All these guys. I mean, some of them have spoken very openly about, they were indulging in various psychotropic substances, and that's what also inspired some of the great work they were doing. So that sounds very plausible.
It's funny.
Hey man, don't bogart that Kotati.
I had read those books as an 11-year-old, a 10-year-old, whatever I was when they were coming out, and that aspect of it was totally lost on me for obvious reasons, and it's something that didn't occur to me until now, in my mid-50s, and I just find it incredibly amusing to think about that as a possibility that that's where they were going with it. Now these guys, I mean, that was actually Englehart who wrote that. And he was probably in his early 20s at that point, which would put him in the perfect age to be writing a story of that nature.
Yeah, it's very likely. If you read Marvel the Lost, what's that history called?
I know exactly the book you're talking about. The Untold Story.
Which is wonderful. The author who we interviewed on the show many years ago, actually, he goes into all that a little bit. So. Yes. I hate to be a killjoy, guys. I have to leave soon because I have to deal with my kids and do a couple of things before I go to bed. I apologize for that. I hope you don't mind if I give my rating and so forth.
Sure. No, absolutely. You got to do what you got to do.
Well, I also got to get up at dawn and teach. Obviously, no one's going to be surprised. This is an A for me all around. The cover is Bob Larkin. These painted covers, gorgeous. The fact that I grabbed my 8-year-old hand, snagged this right away just on the power of the cover, that says it all. And the interior, I'm such a huge fan of Cary Gamble. Although I haven't seen much of his work, he worked on this book a little bit besides this issue. Beautiful. I agree with Bill. There's definitely see the Byrne influence. Maybe he was trying to show continuity between what had come before. Perhaps that's just a guess on my part. But it doesn't take anything away from Gamble himself. I mean, this is gorgeous artwork. But Mary Jo Duffy to me is such the hero of this book in terms of the scripting, capturing the voices of the characters, really doing a wonderful job in terms of the pacing, working with Gamble to bring us, the history of Kunlun, and again to catch a new like me, my 8-year-old new reader to bring me into this world, to make me want to buy more books about Power Man and Iron Fist. So they did their job all the more because I still love these characters. What is it, over 35 years later? So. A all around.
I'm going to just agree with you on that, and the only issue I have with that at all is I'm not sure if there's any points where I might give it an A+ as opposed to just an A. And I think one thing we were a little remiss on is not mentioning, I'm not really familiar with him, but Ricardo Villamonte as the inker in this book also did an excellent job.
Tremendous.
Some of the detail work here, which I'm sure is his, is just really, really well done. And I try to pay attention to inking more than I did as a younger reader, and more often than not, I find myself critical of it on this show. And when I find a book like this where I think it's really, really well inked, I really want to make a point of saying that. And
I'm glad you brought that up, Paul, because I was remiss, because when you have the right team, it's so seamless, you almost don't notice it because it's all, everything's working in such perfect synergy, and you definitely see that here in this issue. I agree 100%.
Bill, you have a rating on this?
Yeah, I'm pretty much right there with you guys. It kind of brought something up back to my head that it was a little disturbing. About a year or two ago, I had a dream to where I was a investigator in like Victorian London, investigating murders, and through the course of the dream, I found out I was knocked unconscious, and I woke up in a cellar, and there was an old woman, and she was growing plants out of my body. and then I woke up from the dream, and I was laying on my couch, and I couldn't move. And then suddenly the woman, it was a dream within a dream. I psyched myself out because then the woman leaned over me again in my living room, and she said something. Oh, it freaked me out because then I woke up for real, and I flew off the couch, and I was all freaked out. So yeah,
so does this book traumatize you a little bit?
Little bit. Yeah.
Your life is really a bad sitcom, Bill.
Yes, it is. So, but even with the trauma I'm reliving right now, I'm still going to give overall the book an A.
Adam, you have anything on this one?
It is a pretty cool cover, I must agree.
Okay, fair enough. If we move quickly on the third one, are you able to stay, Chris, or do you have to depart?
Unfortunately, I cannot. I apologize, gentlemen, but 10 o'clock because I have to... It's dealing with the kids and different crap.
Understood. No problem. Take care
Murd,
of what you have to.
Murd, I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry I won't be able to finish out the journey with you on this one.
I understand, Chris. And besides, you can hear it all later.
I look forward to that. And gentlemen, thank you so much for the invitation. This was a delight as always.
Thanks for coming on, Chris. I appreciate it. It's always great to talk to you, and I look forward to our next chance.
I look forward to it as well. Thank you, gentlemen, and have a fine evening. Take care now.
See you later, Chris.
All right. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, Adam, the stage is all yours, my friend. I'm sorry that you've been underplayed to this point.
Oh, it's as much my fault as anyone's, Paul.
Don't accept blame so easily.
All right, so that brings us to the 90s. And what I bring to the table is my old copy of The New Warriors, number 27. Cover dated September of 1992, which means it was released right in midsummer, probably July of that year. And as you can tell by looking at the upper right-hand corner of that front cover, which is drawn by Mark Bagley, incidentally, It is an Infinity War crossover. And that's the main reason why I chose this particular issue, because Infinity War is a household word these days. It's on the lips of geeks everywhere as we hotly anticipate the latest Avengers movie, which is subtitled Infinity War. But this is the original Infinity War, which was the big Marvel summer crossover of 1992, a follow-up to the Infinity Gauntlet story. It is also the story that got me into comics for the first time, collecting this miniseries and its many crossovers throughout the Marvel publishing line. I still have the little checklist card that I acquired at my local comic shop when I picked up my copy of the Infinity War #1. And I did check it off dutifully. I even, in my scrawling handwriting of the time, wrote in a few unannounced Infinity War crossovers that were eventually added to that slate. So yes, this was a big deal for me. I was 13 years old, and this is the dawn of my life as a comics reader. So my first little pile of comics that I ever bought included this New Warriors crossover. And as I mentioned, the front cover is drawn by Mark Bagley, who is up until recently had been the regular series penciler for the New Warriors. He had been replaced with Derek Robertson just the month prior to this issue being released, but he had apparently continued to do cover art for a few issues after his departure. And the front cover, there's a little banner at the top that says, "The Wildest Warriors Story Ever." And there are a couple of bursts below that say, "You didn't demand it, but you got it anyway. Dark Speedball." And as indicated by those bursts, we have an image drawn by Bagley of Speedball battling his dark doppelganger, Dark Speedball, or as he's called inside the issue itself, Black Ball. And he is indeed a demonic-looking, twisted, dark reflection of Speedball himself. The dark doppelgangers were a fairly important plot point of the Infinity War crossover event, and it was the thing that I, as a 13-year-old, thought was by far the coolest thing about the whole thing. You know, the Infinity Gems coming in close second. But the Dark Doppelgangers were dispatched by the main bad guy of the Infinity War crossover, the Magus. He had one of them custom made. You know, he commissioned them. We learned from one of the other crossovers in the Quasar series, written by Mark Gruenwald. He went to a being called Anthropomorpho, who was responsible for creating manifestation bodies for all of the different cosmic entities and conceptual deities that people, the upper echelons of the Marvel Universe cosmology, you know, like Eternity and Infinity and Oblivion and so forth, they all go to Anthropomorpho to get bodies made for themselves whenever they need to manifest themselves to mere material beings, like Earth superheroes. So Magus commissioned Anthropomorpho to create dark doppelgangers for as many of Earth's superpowered heroes and villains as possible. And the idea was he was going to dispatch them to battle their opposite numbers on Earth and defeat them, and if possible, possess them. Interesting visual. The dark doppelgangers, who generally look like, depending on who was designing them, the quality of the doppelganger designs varied, but the general convention for them was that they looked something like the hero or villain they were supposed to emulate, but they had long fang-like teeth, sharp-pointed claw-like fingers, and the color scheme generally a bit darker in palette. And other little touches could be added at the artist's discretion. Some of the more creative ones included Spider-Man's doppelganger, who had 6 arms, like an actual spider, making him 8-limbed. Hawkeye's doppelganger had kind of a beak-like, hawk-like nose, and then so forth. But actually the ones that we see in New Warriors number 27, for my money, are among the more imaginative. Black Ball here, for example, is pretty cool looking. So the idea was these doppelgangers were supposed to fight and subdue their opposite numbers, and then they could reduce themselves to their original form, which is just this writhing mass of tentacles, wrap themselves around the prone form of the hero or villain they've just defeated, and form kind of a chrysalis around him or her, and then sort of assimilate them, so that when the tentacles unwrapped, the tentacles would then be absorbed into the body of the defeated hero or villain, and that super being would then be in the thrall of Magus. In essence, the Magus is attempting to do to as many of the superpowered beings of Earth as possible what he was never able to do with his own opposite number, Adam Warlock, namely absorb them into his being and bring them around to his philosophy and his way of looking at the universe and his program of conquest. So I always thought that those I've always been fascinated by dark opposite numbers, sort of Jungian shadows of existing characters. People like Venom for Spider-Man or Professor Zoom for Barry Allen's Flash. But these dark doppelgangers are kind of a very pure, simplistic manifestation of the concept of Jungian shadows. They're literally, instead of these heroes encountering unpleasant truths about themselves as reflected in other unrelated characters. They're villains mostly. What they're dealing with here is beings that were literally formed from the extrapolation of the dark, unpleasant truths of their own inner natures that are then manifested and brought to life to battle them.
It almost reminded me of Captain Kirk in The Enemy Within. If you're familiar with that particular story, where he's split into two parts, and there's his good part and his evil part.
Oh, all right. So we're not talking about Mirror Mirror. We're not talking about
no.
No.
But eventually he needs to be put back together, because even the good part is ineffective without the aggressiveness from the evil part. And the way this is presented here, I mean, you're not given that aspect of it, but you are given that this is the dark side of their nature, as opposed to just a villainous version of themselves.
Right.
So I don't know if that helps the description at all, but that's just how I saw it.
Sure. Okay. Getting down to the content of the issue beyond just the dark doppelganger angle. The story is called Dark Sides, fittingly. It's written by Fabian Nicieza, the original series writer for the New Warriors, who stayed with it for a good long time, and recently acquired regular series penciler Derek Robertson. Inker Larry Malstead. Colors by Kevin Tinsley. Letters by Joe Rosen. Edited by Dangerous Danny Fingeroff. It's a small, quote, a small look at an infinite war, brought to you by the following. That's a little banner off the credits box on page 9 there. And it's not really a New Warrior story so much as it is a couple of little subplots spotlighting Speedball, as seen on the cover, and the newest New Warrior, as of issue number 27, Rage, a character who'd been introduced by Larry Hama during his brief run on the Avengers a couple of years earlier.
He was too young. They said, "You're too young. Get out of here."
Yeah, well, Rage is actually younger. Like, his body is older than he's almost got the Shazam thing going. Isn't that the case, where he's much younger than he appears, and that they were originally welcoming him to the Avengers until they realized how young he was, and then they were like, maybe you shouldn't be with the big boys just yet.
Yeah, he was like a 14 or a 16-year-old, and they're like, whoa.
He was 13.
So that young. Okay.
Exactly as old as I was when I bought this comic book, yeah. But yeah, the idea was he was an inner city kid who was coming home from basketball practice, and he was exposed to toxic waste somehow, and that mutated his body into the abnormally large, superhumanly strong adult form that he now wears. So it is kind of like a Captain Marvel or a Prime situation. Difference being he doesn't have a magic word that can change him back. It's more of a the classic Marvel tragic monstrous prisoner in my own body the character trope.
Well, if you don't have angst, they can't be Marvel characters.
Why can't I get exposed to toxic waste?
Yeah.
Sorry, you just FOMO.
Oh, that's no fun.
Yeah, I was by the microwave yesterday at work at lunchtime heating up my lunch, and somebody commented about the radiation off of it. And I said, I'm just waiting to develop superpowers.
Quick, put a spider in there.
Sorry to keep interrupting you, Adam.
Not at all. All right, so the story opens with Speedball delivering pizza, because this is a 90s comic, and of course pizza was like the national food of the 90s. So he's bouncing along using his really cool kinetic superpowers. I always did like Speedball an awful lot. He was a relatively new character as of 1992, and I have heard that there are some people back in those early days of the New Warriors who actually went out of their way not to buy the series specifically because Speedball was involved. Quite the opposite for me. He was my favorite character in this book. So Speedball is he's apparently the big guns of the Marvel Universe have as low an opinion of him as a lot of fans did back then, because they've relegated him to pizza delivery boy. That was his role to play while all the heroes were congregated at the Fantastic Four's headquarters discussing what to do about this Infinity War that was brewing, and they send Speedball to get pizza. And on the way back, he sees his brand new teammate, who, as I mentioned, just joined. He as you said, Paul, the Avengers eventually decided they were going to relegate him to like junior trainee status. And as of New Warriors number 26, the Avengers had a guest appearance there. Rage kind of fell out of their good graces altogether and decided to just jump ship and join the New Warriors instead. And he also acquired a new costume at that point, as opposed to the one he had favored until then, which, going back to what you'd said about the Son of Satan comic, the uniform, the traditional uniform of a gang leader or member in comics in the Bronze Age was a leather jacket with no shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Rage was pretty much continuing that trend. His outfit was a sleeveless leather jacket with no shirt, and his name on the back emblazoned in flaming letters, matching leather trousers, and a ski mask. So he was kind of being portrayed as a kind of super thug who preyed on other thugs. He was affecting the look and attitude of a gang member to battle gang members. But he moved away from that as right after he joined the New Warriors. He got a new costume, as seen in this issue. It's kind of green and gold, with a kind of a armored gold shoulder pads and a gold helmet with a fancy triangle on the front. And what I'm going to call a pec flap. It's kind of like a boob window, except it's a flap of fabric that folds down from the top of his costume to reveal his banging chest. So this is a costume that was given to him by Speedball, apparently. And just as kind of a test of readers' memories, here we are. It's the second issue. It's the first time we actually see him in action wearing this costume, and he's battling his dark doppelganger who's wearing his old costume, slightly modified. The Rage word on the back of the jacket is backwards. His ski mask has been modified slightly, so it looks more like the facial markings of like a beast of prey. And Speedball, he's the one who gave Rage this new costume, and he doesn't recognize Rage in it, so he punches the wrong Rage. And the Dark Doppelganger temporarily gets away. But Rage, for a guy named Rage, he's surprisingly cool about what just happens here. Fabian Nicieza does Rage more favors than his creator Larry Hama did, I think. He portrays him in this issue and in ones to follow in his New Warriors run. And Nicieza portrays Rage as a fairly level-headed, good-hearted, thoughtful young man. And he and Speedball engage in some lighthearted little badinage here, bust each other's chops a little bit. And then Rage has his own little Lacanian confrontation with his dark doppelganger up on the roof of a building. And somewhat atypical of the way the dark doppelganger thing was handled by other writers, other places. The dark doppelganger doesn't get a chance to absorb Rage. Rather, Rage absorbs him. So Nicieza might be riffing off of that... Did the Enemy Within? Was that the episode of Star Trek you were referencing, Paul?
Yes.
Yeah. So Rage instead there's kind of a flash of light as the two of them run at each other in a symmetric panel, a classic Marvel type image, and the two of them just kind of merge with one another. And there are some mild consequences of that later in the issue. Then there's a bit of an interlude as we see the obligatory crowd scene. This is the title splash, featuring a whole bunch of Marvel characters standing around Four Freedoms Plaza, the Fantastic Four's headquarters at the time, making plans for what to do about the Magus. Although at this point I don't think they're aware that Magus really is the mastermind behind the events of Infinity War. They think they're going to fight Thanos. Which is understandable because the Magus is actually employing a duplicate of Thanos as a henchman.
Murd, do you remember why? I don't remember why the top of Freedom 4 Plaza is missing in the photo. What was it blown off in the Infinity War crossover?
I think it's either that or it's something that happened in the Tom DeFalco run of the Fantastic Four book. But I want to say that it did have something to do with Infinity War #1.
I know at one point the Baxter Building, has been launched into space a few times, but this is Freedom's 4 Plaza, so I don't think this is... I think that was in the 80s when that was done again with Byrne, with Christoph, the kid that thought he was Doom.
Right.
Actually tried to steal it. So, but you think it happened in Infinity War 1?
I think. This issue came out around concurrently with Infinity War #4, so it might have happened sometime numbers 1 and 4. But something in me is saying that it was at this time a recent development.
Because it says on the next splash. It says, and host to one of the largest assemblages of heroes ever seen beneath one blown-up roof. So, yeah, obviously this has happened recently. Sorry. I answered my own question. Sorry to bug you.
All right, and it's just a couple of pages here. A quick interlude with a quick check-in with the other members of the New Warriors. As I said, this is mostly a Speedball and Rage show, but it's kind of Fabian Nicieza riffing on the fact that his group of characters aren't really given very much to do in the Infinity War. We get a quick. There's a one-page scene of Rich Rider as Nova. Getting in a few digs at his teammates, lording it over them that he, the cosmic human rocket Nova is the one member of their team that was chosen to go into space. Because at this stage in the Infinity War story, the assembled heroes were splitting up into home and away squads. One team was just going to defend the home front, and the other was going to take the fight to, they thought, Thanos. And Nova was the only one that was, I guess, deemed cosmic enough by Starlin and the people that were working on the Infinity War miniseries itself to be worthy to be a part of the away team, and he's kind of rubbing it in his teammate's face. And Fabian Nicieza is kind of taking it in stride. He probably felt that his characters were being snubbed a little bit in this big event, and he's just kind of shrugs and uses it as an opportunity for a couple pages of character shtick. The team leader, Night Thrasher, just kind of brushes it off as saying, Captain America has got a grudge against us, referring to the events of the previous issue, actually, when team founder Marvel Boy was dragged off to the vault to await trial for he was accused of murdering his own father, and the New Warriors and Avengers ran afoul of each other as a result of that, and that's why they're on Captain America's shit list at this point. But yeah, it's just a little bit of a clowning around between the Avengers, Nova being the biggest clown of the group in this scene. A little bit of the romantic tension between Nova and Namor's cousin once removed, Namorita. The two of them were kind of an on-again, off-again, will they, won't they item throughout the New Warriors run. And then we go back to Speedball, who bounces his way to his hometown of Springdale, Connecticut, finds that it's a war zone. Apparently his dark doppelganger got there before he did. He has an encounter with an irate family of Springdale residents who look a lot like the Simpsons. On page 12, that this is still a timely reference because this is 1992 and Simpsons were a fairly new thing at that time. Speedball also tosses out a couple of other little 90s-isms. He mentions the LA riots and he mentions MC Hammer. So, again, the 90s. He runs afoul of his own father, Justin Baldwin, who is the local DA and has a mat-on for superheroes and costume vigilantes in general and Speedball in particular. This is a classic, again, Marvel trope of a hero having a close family member who is hostile towards his or her alter ego. And it's a carryover from Speedball's short-lived solo series, Speedball the Masked Marvel. Plot points of which Fabian Nicieza carried over into the New Warriors. He's one of the better writers who have worked in comics in the past 20 years as far as incorporating past continuity into current stories. Doesn't get quite enough credit for doing that. So Speedball has an encounter with his dad and his armed forces, shows off some interesting ways of using his powers, and there's more to it than just bouncing around. He's basically a living bundle of kinetic energy, and if he focuses all of those nifty little multicolored Dippin' Dots that float around him all the time in the proper ways, he can actually use them to create force fields, null fields, and even concentrated blasts of kinetic energy at times. We'll actually see him doing that before the end of this story. Then he realizes, Speedball does, that his dark doppelganger may be menacing his mom while he's wasting time confronting his dad and his cops, so he bounces off to deal with that. Cut back to Brooklyn, where Rage, having just absorbed his own dark side, and encounters a bunch of liquor store robbers, and goes a little overboard with subduing them, bashes them up pretty badly. He's actually congratulated by standers-by for having been so violent with these kids, and he realizes at that point that this is not the kind of hero he wants to be. He's not acting like himself. This is a consequence of his having absorbed his dark doppelganger. He flees the scene, screaming no at the top of his voice, and he berates himself on a nearby rooftop. Is this the answer? Give in to anger, to hatred, to rage? Is this the best way to help my people? And that right there is Fabian Nicieza taking advantage of the conventions of this Infinity War crossover, really seamlessly incorporating the requirements and restrictions of this crossover event to advance some of his own plot lines and agendas, doing that very well. He's taking Rage a little further away from the angry young man formula for creating African-American characters that was disappointingly prevalent in comics in the 70s and 80s. So Rage becomes much less an angry young man in this story as he confronts his own anger, personified, and makes peace with it. Meanwhile, back in Springdale, Connecticut, Speedball arrives at his home just in time to save his mom from being menaced by his dark doppelganger, drawn with beautiful hideousness by Derek Robertson. He's got that dark color scheme going on, red hair instead of Speedball's usual blonde. He's got this very snake-like face with a flattened nose and a dislocated jaw, big dripping fangs. He looks great. And those little multicolored Tutti Frutti Wonder Bread dots that are used to represent Speedball's kinetic field. He draws those on Blackball as kind of these angry little black squiggles with a little bit of color overlaid on them. It's effective visualization for this dark side of Speedball's character. There ensues a great Donnybrook between Speedball and his own worse nature, and it concludes with Speedball kind of expending his kinetic energy field by blasting the Blackball into ashes, and he's a little bit disappointed in himself. So we've got two different confrontations with dark sides between Speedball and Rage, and one sort of makes peace with and integrates his dark side into himself successfully, whereas Speedball has to succumb to his own dark side to defeat it, and is much less certain that he likes the outcome. Another interesting and important point of continuity, at that moment, as Robbie embraces his mom, he's reverted to his civilian self, and his father, the crusading district attorney, walks in and discovers his son's secret identity, and there's kind of a terse, very 90s style Generation X versus Baby Boomer confrontation between Speedball and his Law and Order obsessed dad, and Speedball bounces away and saying something about how his father has to learn to accept who he is or else he will have lost his son. And then Speedball and Rage catch up together on yet another rooftop, compare notes, and Speedball. It ends with Speedball bouncing away to buy more pizza. The end.
Now, I didn't read a lot of New Warriors. This is kind of this is at the point where I was just kind of getting back into comics after having stopped for a while, and I was I was only peripherally involved as far as knowing who these characters were, but I thought there was a lot of good stuff reading this issue. I thought this was a pretty good choice. I don't know if this is the typical introduction to the characters issue, because it's you're kind of being thrust in the middle of it, but I never felt lost reading it. It's interesting. What's his name? Daniel Robertson, or not Daniel, Derek. I'm not familiar with him. I don't remember having seen anything by him at all, but he seems like an ideal artist to take over for Mark Bagley, because his style appears to be very similar in a lot of ways. So you can go seamlessly from Bagley to him without having readers be too bothered by it. I was totally oblivious until you just mentioned it about the Simpsons. I think that's just a great visual that I missed, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's just so cool looking when you see it, and once you see it. Like, once you pointed it out, it's so obvious. It's like, how now I can't unsee it. So, there's a certain sense of humor to this issue that I enjoyed. Like I said, I think the artwork is good. The secondary costume for Rage, the new costume, in some ways, it looks to me like Guardian from the DC universe.
Around the helmet, yes, absolutely.
Because of the helmet, exactly. The actual uniform itself, not so much, but the helmet just makes, that's what it's reminiscent of to me. And like you say, it's interesting, the contrast of how they each deal with their dark side. And, it shows you that there are different ways to do it. it almost reads like a Malibu comic to me. I don't know if that sounds right, but like the way Malibu, at least the way I saw it, was an upstart company that was trying to emulate Marvel and create a universe their way with all these new characters, and it almost feels like that type of an issue just put directly into the Marvel universe. They come along later and they're all teenagers, which seems to be typical of the Malibu books that I read. And you still have the same Marvel angst with the situation with the father and everything. But very enjoyable read, I thought.
Mm-hmm. I just last summer when I went nuts going after back issues, the one store I told you about, Paul, where everything was $1, all the back issues were $1. Mm-hmm. I pretty much picked up the entire this entire run for about $1 a piece for each issue. So I haven't read them all. Of course, as you know, I bought a lot of comics last year that I've been don't know when I'll eventually get to reading all of them. But I mean, I started to read them from the beginning. I haven't got to this point in my read. I'm only about 5 to 6 issues in to the series itself, and of course that was a few months ago. But I did enjoy this read, and I got a question though. Do you think Rage killed that one guy he threw into the window of that car?
I don't think he did. No.
I don't know. That's pretty hard. I mean, obviously he didn't story-wise, but in to be realistic, he probably dead. Yeah, I think that kid's dead.
Yeah. If this were happening in the real world, yeah, probably. But in the Marvel Universe, I'm sure he wasn't killed, because there would have been, knowing the way Nicieza writes, there would have been a follow-up. There would have been repercussions to that, like an ongoing subplot in which Rage had to deal with the consequences of his little rampage there.
Either that or pay his medical bills. Something.
Even in the Marvel Universe, he's going to need some hospital time.
Oh, yeah.
I really, really like the splash page where Speedball confronts his doppelganger. I think that's really well done.
With the unhinged jaw and the sort of Nosferatu body language there.
Yes, and also what you pointed out very ably, the difference between the Speedball bubbles and the doppelganger scribbles, which is just very cool. I just think there's sometimes little artistic touches like that, or The Simpsons, which, quite frankly, I sometimes overlook them because I love good artwork, but we've talked about this on the show several times. As much as I love good artwork, I'm a story first guy. If we have really good art with bad story, I get bored by it and I'm not interested. But if we have a really good story with bad art, I can get by the art usually to read it. So a lot of times when I'm reading it, I'm concentrating more on the story and where it's going, and I miss certain little things like that. And I'm always happy when somebody points them out to me, as you just did, because I think sometimes I just go through these too quickly. I think that's what it comes down to.
Well, again, it is a 90s comic, and it sort of lends itself to quick reading. The other two comics we talked about tonight, probably more substantial reads. I do have a habit of using food analogies to describe the things I read, comics or otherwise. And while Power Man and Iron Fist 75, Marvel Spotlight number 12, probably more like entrees, the thing I brought to the table is probably more akin to Dorito dust.
I don't know if I'd be that harsh.
I am being a little too hard. There are a lot of 90s comics that would have been Dorito dust, but this is a little better than that. This is at least like a granola bar or something.
Yeah, no, I think there's not a lot of story progression, but there are some significant things that are going on. Again, you pointed out the contrast and how they each deal with their dark sides. There's the whole aspect of him having so little respect from the heroes that they send him out to get pizza. There's the Nova thing, which I found kind of amusing, although I wasn't sure how accurate that is to the Rich Rider character. I'm thinking at the time it probably was accurate, but I just don't know. I don't think they've maintained that type of persona for him.
He lost his powers for a time, and I think that it maybe gave him a few problems with self-image, actually, and with insecurity. So maybe he was kind of playing the role of the blowhard, experienced hero in an exaggerated fashion to compensate for that.
Is it later in this run, Murd, that he switches to the brown costume, or was it before this and he switched back to the blue costume?
The brown costume was earlier. That was very brief when Tom DeFalco first gathered this group of young characters together as the New Warriors. He actually changed Nova's name to Kid Nova. I think to avoid confusion with the Frankie Ray character, who at that point had become Nova. The Herald of Galactus. But then he very quickly readopted the more traditional uniform of the Xandarian Nova Corps.
The brown outfit didn't work. I mean, it only works on Wolverine.
They every once in a while they try new things just to shake it up a little bit, I guess. And sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't. And when they shook it up with Speedball and they made him Penance, I thought that was an epic fail, to be honest with you.
Yeah. That was a dark Speedball that I definitely did not.
I saw no need to do that to the character that's supposed to be very happy-go-lucky in how he's presented, and now you got to present him as a total dark side. But that's what 12, 13 years down the road for this, maybe more than that.
I think 2000 was it 5 or 6? So it was at least 13 years after this. But at the time,
that was the precursor to Civil War. So.
Yeah, so Fabian Nicieza was quoted as saying that he loved writing Speedball because it was so refreshing that there were at least a few of these long underwear types who really enjoyed what they were doing and battled evil as much for the joy of it as for anything else. And, of course, then when they did the penance thing after Civil War, they were pretty much calculatedly squishing that aspect of the character right out of him. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, that too passed, and Robbie Baldwin was back in his Speedball costume and resumed more or less his original worldview and personality. Yeah.
Now, one artistic thing I will complain about is I routinely detest when Wolverine is drawn with the huge wings on his mask, the way he is on the montage scene with all the heroes. I just think that looks horrible.
I was actually drawn to that. I like the way.
Well, you really? Okay. So different minds can view it different ways then. But I just don't see the utility of that. And I would think, if anything, if you're wearing that, it would be very distracting if you're in a fight. Having those wings flapping around while you're trying to throw a punch.
That's his dress uniform. He only wears it to stand around in big groups of superheroes and smoke.
Okay, we'll go with that as the explanation. That'll work. But I think everybody else routinely in that shot looks pretty good. Now, is that when Thor was actually Jake?
Thinking of Eric Masterson.
Eric Masterson, yes, that's what I meant.
No, remember Thor did grow a beard at one point because his face was scarred in the 90s. Yeah, and then he was
Jake Yarlgood, but he was still Thor.
Oh, yes, right. I was thinking, you're right. Sorry.
But I'm talking, Adam is right. I'm talking about when he was Eric Masterson, when he was basically Thunderstrike. Before he took on the name Thunderstrike and everybody thought he was Thor. Is that the Thor we have here, or do we know?
I think Thor had become Thor again at that point, so that might just be bearded Odin's son, Thor. But maybe when he was still calling himself Sigurd Jarlsson. I don't know. But but Eric Masterson became Thunderstrike right around this time.
Okay, and Hercules looks considerably bigger than Thor, and almost as big as Strong Guy.
He's on a higher. He's on a stool. He's yelling across the room. So see, he's like, "Hey, hey!" All right. Well, maybe not. Hey. But he's trying to yell to Sasquatch on the next page.
Yeah. That's it. Beer.
I do think, though, as we started to talk about, I think this is not your typical 90s book, though, because I do think there's a little bit more substance to it than a lot of the books we had. And I think a lot of the art in the 90s books that we complain about and criticize had a rushed appearance to it, and I don't think that's the case here either. I think this art looks fairly well thought out, story-wise. It's not a series of poster images. We do have that one poster image in there, but I think it's an excellent poster image, so I wouldn't criticize it. So overall, I think this is, we've talked in the past about how the 90s sometimes get a bad rap. That, yes, there was bad stuff that came out in the 90s, but that was a byproduct to some extent of volume, that they were putting out so much that there was bound to be some of it that was just, rushed and not so good. But I also think that there was a lot of quality stuff that came out in the 90s. Infinity Gauntlet and Infinity War, I both think were excellent series. I do think Infinity War went a little too far on the crossovers. I think that started a bad trend.
Yeah, there were dozens of them, as my checklist will attest. And I bought every single one. This was the beginning of my comics readership. After Infinity War ended, some of those series I continued to read, and some I did not. But I saw plenty of examples of what you were talking about, Paul. The rushed, hurried, slapdash, scratchy-looking artwork, and the excessive splash pages and so forth. So some of those crossovers were dreck. I thought so then, and I would think so even more now, I'm sure, if I reread any of those comics. But some of them were proved, we did show their creative teams in their best light, and this was certainly one of them. The New Warriors were one of the series that I ended up sporadically collecting after Infinity War let up. So this is an example of a quality mainstream 90s comic.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the trend where I said, this started a bad trend of the crossovers, I think that really hit much more so when we got to the Infinity Crusade. I think a lot of the crossovers there felt very, very forced. And it was pretty much after that I stopped feeling a need to read crossovers. If it was a series that I happened to be reading already, fine. But I wouldn't go out of my way to read it just because it was a crossover to that main event book.
Well, you wised up early.
I guess either that or I got cheap. I'm not sure which it is.
You never.
We've talked about how the Bronze Age is my sweet spot, and I've talked with Bill about this in the past. How I value those books so much more than the new books that come out, and yet new books cost $4 and $5 each, and meanwhile the Bronze Age books I'm picking up, and I have my want list and everything, but I generally look to not spend more than $2 on a book if I can help it. So I guess there is a cheapness aspect to it, but there's also a value that I seek.
I also see it as a challenge. You're a bargain hunter.
And it's fun, perhaps we'll run into each other again at New York Comic Con this year, but it's fun to go there and see, row after row of $2 bins and have my want list with me and just be pulling out, the books that I've been looking for, at that price point. So, there is a certain nirvana that you reach when you get into that kind of situation.
I know the feeling well.
Anyway, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I was just agreeing. Because recently I told you I had went to another store that had the $2 bins, and I dug. I only need 12 issues of Marvel 2-in-1 to get the first that run. Not counting the annuals. I need about 5 of the annuals. So yeah, I'm only down to 12 issues of Marvel 2-in-1 now.
There is a Jim Starlin written and drawn Thanos related one that will be probably one of the more difficult ones to find.
Marvel 2-in-1 Thanos? You're not talking about the annual, are you?
Yeah, one of the annuals.
Oh, yeah.
Number 2.
That's one of the ones I don't have. Yeah. Oh yeah, that one's gonna be not easy.
Yeah, well that's the one that crosses over with Avengers Annual number 7.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yep. That's one of the seminal books of that era. So yeah, that will be a harder one to find at a decent price.
Yeah, just like that Iron Man issue that introduced Thanos. I don't have that either in my Iron Man run. It's one of the ones, it'll be pricey if I ever... Doubt I'll ever stumble across that at a good price.
Well, I think the only way you stumble across that is literally stumbling across it because somebody's selling a collection or whatever and they have no idea that that's a significant book.
Yeah, then I'll be that guy. Oh, I guess I could take the whole thing off your hands for, this much. Taking a beating on this. Gimme. Oh, sorry. As the greed comes out. My darker half.
Your doppelganger is like a mirror image of the regular you.
Right. Bill has emerged and wrapped his tentacles around him.
All right, so anything more to add before we rate this one?
No, just as we've already said, this is the New Warriors in general, and this issue in specific are among those buried gems of the '90s. It's I would recommend fishing the first 50 or so issues of New Warriors, at least, out of the cheap bins if you get the opportunity. It's some quality storytelling and some really fine art. Bagley did the first 2 years' worth, and Derek Robertson came on and did the second 2 years' worth. And the Infinity War, yeah, this is one of the better. I mean, as I said, I've read dozens of Infinity War crossovers, and when I thought to myself, okay, this is, as the Infinity War movie makes its way to theaters, I thought this would be a time to tell the Back to the Bins readership a little something about my experience with the first Infinity War and why they should be more familiar with it than they are. And of all the crossovers I read, this is, whenever I think back on all those crossovers, this is one of the ones that pops into my mind first. And I think having reread this, there's a good reason for that. So thank you guys for the opportunity to trip down memory lane with you about this particular comic from my personal past as a collector.
Well, thanks for coming here and going through it with us. I'm going to actually
excellent choice, Murd. Excellent choice.
I'm going to give it my ratings. I think the cover is pretty cool. It's standard Mark Bagley as far as the individuals, the positioning, and everything. This, it's reminiscent of his work on Spider-Man. I think it's a very solid cover. It's catching. The cover scheme is cool, especially when you contrast the yellow with the red hair on the black ball. So I'm going to say a solid B on the cover. The interior art, I have to add a half a grade to it just because you pointed out The Simpsons to me. So I was going to say a B, and now I'm going to say a B+. And story-wise, again, for a 90s book, it reads quickly, but I think it's got some subtext and some things to make you think that take it above the level of average. And I'm going to say a B+ on the story as well, and I'm going to give the book a B+.
The cover for me is a solid A because it's an extremely memorable image because it's never left my mind after the over 25 years since I saw it. I like the positioning of the figures. It's a highly kinetic action image, quite literally because these characters have kinetic powers. So A there, and an A+ for the artwork because, it's... Derek Robertson, as you mentioned, he's got a lot of Bagley strengths, but it's Bagley's strengths alloyed with those of Kevin Maguire. A lot of the facial expressions that Robertson draws in here are really top-notch. And, of course, going back to that splash page with Speedball and Blackball confronting each other at the Baldwin house. It's really splashy, big, action-oriented 90s art, but it's such good 90s art. I mean, reading this, I really got kind of a thrill. It's just so much cleaner and shinier than a lot of the comics art that I'm exposed to currently in 2018. So big ups on the artwork there. Story-wise, it is kind of thin soup, but it's flavorful, well seasoned. It's Fabian Nicieza is one of my favorite writers and has been since I first started reading comics. It's not exactly his best work as a writer, but it's a good solid issue. It gives you spotlight on a couple of my favorite characters in the New Warriors team. So on balance, for different reasons, I think it averages out to about a B+ or A- for me.
The cover, nice Bagley. what's odd is that compared to the art on the inside, I almost want to say that the interior art is even more kinetic, and the way Speedball moves is drawn better on the interior compared to the cover, at least for me. But I'm still going to give the cover a B plus, A minus. The interior art is going to be again, B plus, A minus. What's nice about the story is that even though it was probably mandated, we need a crossover, you need to do this. It's nice that they worked it in a way into the story that the characters that it actually it kind of means something, at least, and it's not just a crossover. It seems for the sake of a crossover. Because I seem to remember some of these, because I was getting some of these when I was in the service, and some of the crossovers I don't have fond memories of with some of the battles between the doppelgangers, but here it seems like there was a story-driven purpose with the characters and how they each resolved their doppelgangers in different ways. So I'm going to give the story actually a B plus. So overall, I'd say A minus, B plus book for me.
So we're all articulating different reasons for what we did like about it, but we all still wound up in the same general area when we finished it up. So that's kind of cool. And again, yeah, good choice, Murd. And this is one of the pleasures of doing this show, I think, is every once in a while you get a book like this that you might not otherwise read, and you read it because of the random nature of the show, and and sometimes you find one that's a gem that you don't know about. So
gem in the rough.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm glad you brought this one out, because I would have been fully unaware of it.
My pleasure to play Prospector and bring that diamond in the rough to you.
And it was our pleasure to have you on, and I want to thank you for making the time to come on with us tonight.
Oh, thank you very much, Paul and Bill. I've had a great time here tonight.
And
always.
Yeah, with any luck, we won't take so long before we find the time to get together with you guys again, because this is always something I look forward to, in the rare occasions we've been able to do it.
Now, fingers tightly crossed then that our schedules will cooperate with us in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thanks again, and I guess that'll do it for tonight's show, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to our show, and we hope you'll continue to join us each and every week for more good old-fashioned comic book back issue awesomeness. You can contact Back to the Bins to leave feedback, comments, questions, suggestions, and criticisms via email at backtothebins@gmail.com or by joining the Back to the Bins group on Facebook. Back to the Bins is a proud affiliate of the Two True Freaks Internet Radio Network, which you may find at www.twotruefreaks.com. Two True Freaks is a registered trademark of DiManzo Corps of Milan, Italy. All rights reserved. Each and every month, the Two True Freaks Network produces dozens of new and exciting episodes which regularly reach tens of thousands of loyal listeners worldwide. Sponsorship and or advertising opportunities are available. Inquiries may be made via email to twotruefreaks@gmail.com. Please take a moment to stop by the twotruefreaks.com site and check out their many other fine podcasts, won't you? Thanks, and we'll see you next week.
Good night, Mr. Robinson.